Imagine sleeping through a snowstorm, with no fire, no heater, and nothing but stone walls. Medieval people did it routinely. But what eerie survival method did they use that we never dare try now? When winter hit medieval Europe, people didn't just tough it out above ground like sitting ducks waiting for frostbite. They got smart about it. They dug down. Underground shelters became the difference between surviving winter and becoming a medieval popsicle. The earth itself acted like a giant natural blanket. Dig just 3 or 4 feet down, and you'd find temperatures that stayed remarkably steady compared to the bone-chilling air above. While surface temperatures swung wildly from day to night, the ground kept things relatively cozy. But here's where it gets interesting. Medieval families didn't stop at simple dirt holes. They built these underground rooms with thick mud and stone walls that could soak up heat during the day and slowly release it through the night. Think of these walls like medieval thermal batteries. Wood might look nice, but it's about as useful for storing heat as a sieve is for carrying water. Smart builders partially buried their homes, leaving just enough above ground to avoid looking like hobbit holes. Well, maybe they did look like hobbit holes, but at least they were warm hobbit holes. These partially buried structures blocked those vicious winter winds that could turn a cozy evening into a survival situation faster than you could say, pass the mead. The dense walls worked like medieval bouncers, keeping the cold air outside where it belonged. When bitter winds tried to sneak through, these thick barriers slowed them down, filtered them, and generally made them behave. Nights became less harsh when your walls were doing the heavy lifting instead of your body trying to generate heat all by itself. And get this, families built these ingenious shelters using nothing but local materials. No trips to the medieval hardware store required. They grabbed mud from nearby streams, stones from fields, and anything else Mother Nature provided within walking distance. Talk about sustainable living before it was trendy. The ground chill that could seep up through floors. They figured that out too. Strategic placement and clever construction meant cold couldn't creep up from below while they were trying to stay warm above. These underground and semi-underground shelters weren't just about digging holes and hoping for the best. They were carefully planned survival systems that used the Earth's natural insulation properties to maximum advantage. But even the smartest underground shelter needed walls that could really trap heat and block drafts. The medieval builders had some pretty clever tricks up their sleeves when it came to creating walls that actually worked. Medieval folks weren't messing around when it came to building walls that could actually keep the cold out. These weren't your flimsy modern drywall disasters that let every breeze waltz right through. The secret weapon, stuffing those walls with whatever they could get their hands on. Mud, straw, animal dung. Yes, you heard that right, dung. Makes sense, right? When you're facing a winter that could literally kill you, you stop being picky about your insulation materials. That cow patty might just save your life. But here's where it gets interesting. They developed this technique called wattle and daub that sounds fancy but was basically medieval engineering at its finest. Picture weaving thin branches between wooden posts, creating a basket-like framework. Then they'd slap on a mixture of clay, mud, straw, and whatever else was handy. The weaving trapped pockets of air, and air is actually a fantastic insulator when it's not moving around. The clay ceiling was crucial too. Those thick clay layers didn't just keep the structure together, they stopped cold drafts dead in their tracks. Medieval builders knew that even tiny gaps could turn a warm room into an icebox faster than you could say, winter's coming. And the weird part is how they layered everything. Wall construction became this intricate process where each layer served multiple purposes. The inner layer might be packed with straw for insulation, the middle layer, dense clay for wind protection, and the outer layer designed to shed water. Smart stuff for people who supposedly lived in the Dark Ages. Then there's the floor situation. Most medieval homes had earthen floors, which sounds awful until you realize they covered them with thick layers of straw. That straw wasn't just for comfort, it created a barrier between your feet and the cold ground below. Change it out regularly, and you've got decent insulation that actually works. The thickness mattered more than you'd think. Some of these walls were 2 feet thick or more. That's not just showing off, it's thermal mass at work. Thick walls absorb heat during the day and slowly release it at night. Like having a giant room-sized heating pad built right into your house. These construction techniques weren't just about staying warm during the day. The real test came when the sun went down and temperatures dropped fast. But even the best walls in the world couldn't solve the biggest challenge medieval families faced when darkness fell. That's where body heat became their most important survival tool. When you're freezing your tail off and there's no central heating, you get real creative about staying warm. Medieval families figured out something we modern folks might find a bit awkward. Body heat is free heating, and it actually works. Picture a typical medieval home on a brutal winter night. The whole family would pile into one bed like sardines. Mom, dad, kids, maybe even grandma. Everyone squeezed together under whatever blankets they could scrape together. Privacy? That was a luxury for warmer months. But here's where it gets interesting. These weren't just human slumber parties. Families often brought their livestock indoors during the worst storms. Cows, pigs, chickens, basically living, breathing heaters that happened to give milk and eggs. A cow puts out about as much heat as a small space heater, except it doesn't need electricity and occasionally gives you dinner. The math was simple. Each person generates roughly the same heat as a 100-watt light bulb. Get 5 or 6 people together and you've got serious warmth happening. Add a few animals and suddenly that freezing room becomes survivable. Well, there was one small problem: the smell. Imagine sharing your bedroom with Uncle Bob, 3 kids, and a goat. Medieval noses got pretty tough, but hey, dead people don't complain about odors. Some families took this sharing thing even further. During particularly brutal winters, neighbors would actually move in together temporarily. Whole communities might cram into the sturdiest house available. Makes sense, right? More bodies meant more heat, and splitting firewood costs didn't hurt either. The really smart families arranged their sleeping situations strategically. Kids in the middle. They lose heat faster than adults. Biggest person on the outside to block drafts. Animals positioned where their body heat would rise up toward the sleeping area. These people had thermal dynamics figured out before anyone knew what thermal dynamics were. And the weird part is, it worked incredibly well. Modern survival experts still teach these same techniques. Your body heat can keep you alive when everything else fails. Then there's the psychological angle. When you're huddled together fighting off winter's worst, families got closer, literally and figuratively. Shared hardship builds bonds that central heating just can't match. But even with all that body heat magic happening, medieval families knew they needed every advantage they could get. Smart heat management meant making the most of every scrap of warmth available, including the clothes on their backs and every piece of fabric in the house. Medieval people turned layering into survival science. Not the cute kind where you pick matching scarves either. This was life or death clothing strategy. Every single piece of fabric in a household had a job during winter. That ratty old tunic your grandfather wore, perfect base layer. The wool cloak with moth holes, still warmer than nothing. Medieval families hoarded cloth like modern people stockpile toilet paper during emergencies. But here's where it gets interesting. They didn't just pile everything on randomly. These folks developed a system that would make modern outdoor enthusiasts jealous. Linen went closest to skin because it wicked moisture away. Wool came next for insulation. Then, whatever else they could find. Leather, fur, more wool, even stuffed fabric pouches. 6 layers wasn't unusual, sometimes more on the worst nights. Makes sense, right? Each layer trapped warm air, creating pockets of heat around the body. Medieval people understood thermal dynamics without ever hearing those fancy words. Then there's the bedding situation. Straw wasn't just thrown on the ground haphazardly. Families knew thick, dry straw worked like medieval mattress padding, blocking cold from seeping up through floors. The thicker, the better. Fresh straw every few weeks if they could manage it. Well, here's the part that might surprise you. Even torn rags had value. Scraps got stuffed between layers of clothing or sewn into quilted patches. Nothing went to waste because waste meant freezing. Your great-grandmother who saved every button and fabric scrap? She inherited that instinct from centuries of winter survival, but the real challenge was keeping everything dry. Damp clothing and bedding became deadly enemies during cold months. Medieval families obsessed over moisture control, constantly rotating bedding near fires to dry it out. Wet wool doesn't just smell terrible, it steals body heat faster than you can generate it. And the weird part is, this layering system worked so well that some techniques survived into modern times. Ever wonder why your elderly relatives always seem to wear multiple sweaters indoors? That's medieval wisdom right there, passed down through generations who remembered when staying warm meant staying alive. Smart families even prepared layering stations near sleeping areas. everything laid out and ready. Because fumbling around in the dark, looking for that extra blanket could mean losing precious body heat. Speaking of heat, medieval people discovered another clever trick that modern camping enthusiasts would recognize. But managing personal warmth was just one piece of the puzzle. The real magic happened when they learned to capture and store heat from their fires in ways that would astound you. Banking a fire wasn't just throwing logs on and hoping for the best. Medieval folks turned this into pure survival art. They'd take hot coals and embers from their main fire and carefully bury them under a thick layer of ash. Sounds backwards, right? But here's the genius part. Those buried embers would stay warm for hours, sometimes the entire night. The ash acted like a medieval thermostat. It kept the coals from burning too fast while protecting that precious heat. Come morning, they'd brush away the ash and blow gently on those glowing embers. Boom! Instant fire starter without wasting matches or flint. Pretty clever for people who supposedly lived in the Dark Ages. Small coals were actually better than big logs for this trick. Large chunks of wood burned hot and fast, then died out completely. But smaller pieces? They'd smolder steadily under that ash blanket, giving off consistent warmth without the dramatic flames. Medieval families learned to break down their wood into different sizes. Big pieces for cooking, smaller ones for overnight banking. Then there's the smoke factor. Nobody wants to wake up in a room that looks like a barbecue pit gone wrong. Banking fires produced way less smoke than roaring blazes. The controlled burn meant families could sleep without choking on fumes or having their eyes water all night long. Makes sense when your bedroom and kitchen were basically the same room. Smart fire management meant stretching precious fuel supplies. Wood wasn't unlimited, especially during harsh winters when gathering became dangerous. Every log mattered. By banking fires correctly, families could make one evening's wood supply provide warmth well into the next day. Talk about getting your money's worth. Except money was probably a chicken or some barley back then. The real trick was knowing exactly how much ash to use. Too little, and the embers burned out too fast. Too much, and you'd smother them completely. Medieval parents passed down this knowledge like family recipes. Kids learned by watching, making mistakes, and probably getting yelled at for wasting good coals. But here's what's fascinating. When the main logs were completely gone and the family faced a potentially freezing night, those buried embers became absolute lifesavers. They were the difference between surviving until morning and, well, not surviving. Just a handful of glowing coals under ash could keep a small room bearable. Of course, managing heat was only half the battle. Even the warmest fire meant nothing if icy drafts kept sneaking into the house through every crack and gap. Ever tried sleeping in a house that feels like a wind tunnel? Medieval families knew that feeling all too well. The difference between a survivable winter night and a miserable one often came down to one thing: controlling the air. But here's where it gets tricky. You can't just seal everything up tight and call it a day. Do that and you'll wake up in a swamp of condensation with mold growing on your walls. Medieval people had to walk a tightrope between keeping warm and keeping dry. Their solution? Thick curtains made from whatever fabric they could find. These weren't decorative pieces, they were survival gear. Hung around beds, doorways, and windows, these heavy cloth barriers created smaller spaces that stayed warmer. Think of it like making a fort, but with higher stakes. Then there were the shutters, solid wooden panels that could slam shut when the wind picked up. Some families got creative, stuffing the gaps between shutter boards with straw, moss, or even old rags. Every crack was a potential enemy. Well, the real art was in managing ventilation. Smart families kept small openings near the ceiling to let out damp air while blocking the brutal drafts that crept in at ground level. Hot air rises, cold air sinks. Basic physics that saved lives. And the weird part is how resourceful they got with draft stoppers. Long cloth tubes stuffed with straw, placed along the bottom of doors and windows. Some families used rolled-up animal skins. Others made do with bunched-up clothing. Whatever worked. But managing airflow wasn't just about comfort, it was about preventing disaster. Rooms that got too damp bred sickness. Completely sealed spaces could become dangerous with smoke from fires. Medieval people learned to read their homes like weather patterns. The most experienced families developed routines around this: morning checks for new cracks, evening adjustments based on wind direction. Some even used candle flames to test for drafts. If the flame flickered, they knew exactly where the cold was sneaking in. Makes sense, right? They turned draft detection into a science without any fancy equipment. Smart positioning mattered too. Hanging extra cloth near sleeping areas created warm pockets, moving furniture to block problem spots, using whatever they had to redirect airflow away from where people spent the most time. Yet, even with all these clever techniques for managing air and blocking drafts, medieval families needed something more on the coldest nights, something that could provide direct, concentrated warmth exactly where they needed it most. Medieval people turned into masters of improvisation when it came to staying warm. They looked around and thought, what can I heat up and stick under my blanket? The answer, pretty much everything. Hot stones became the medieval equivalent of heating pads. Families would toss smooth river rocks right into the fire embers, let them soak up all that heat, then wrap them in cloth scraps. These stone bottles went straight under the covers at bedtime. Smart folks kept 2 or 3 going. When one cooled down, they'd swap it out for a fresh hot one. The trick was finding stones that wouldn't crack from the heat. Nobody wanted exploding rocks in their bed. But wait, there's more creativity here. Animal skins weren't just fashion statements, they were survival gear. A good bear pelt or thick sheepskin could mean the difference between sleeping and shivering all night. These weren't your modern processed furs either. We're talking about rough, sometimes smelly animal hides that still had the natural oils intact. Those oils actually helped repel moisture while trapping body heat. Then there's the stuff they stuffed everywhere. Dry leaves became instant insulation material. Families would collect massive piles of oak and maple leaves in autumn, keeping them bone dry in storage areas. When winter hit hard, these leaves got packed into wall cracks, thrown on floors, and even stuffed into cloth bags as makeshift pillows. Pine boughs worked like medieval air fresheners with a bonus. They contained natural oils that helped block drafts. People would weave them into thick mats or lean them against walls as wind barriers. Plus, they smelled way better than most things in a medieval house. Straw wasn't just for animals anymore. Human bedding got the full straw treatment, thick layers that created air pockets underneath sleeping bodies. The key was keeping it dry and replacing it regularly. Wet straw was worse than no straw at all. Wool became the ultimate multitasker. Raw wool, still full of lanolin from the sheep, got packed into cracks, wrapped around hot stones, and layered over everything else. That natural sheep oil made wool almost waterproof while keeping its insulating properties intact. The genius part? Everything was renewable and local. No supply chains, no shipping costs, no waiting for deliveries. Mother Nature provided the heating supplies. People just had to be clever enough to use them. Of course, collecting and preparing all these natural materials took serious daily effort. Medieval families developed routines that kept them warm through the harshest months, and those routines were absolutely crucial for survival. Medieval families didn't just survive winter by accident. They had systems, routines, and a stubborn determination that would put most modern people to shame. Every day brought the same critical tasks that meant the difference between warmth and misery. First thing each morning, check the roof. Snow piled up fast, and a collapsed roof meant disaster. Families would climb up with makeshift tools, clearing off the heavy white burden before it became too much. One neighbor helping another was common. Nobody wanted to explain to their wife why they didn't help old Henrik when his roof caved in. But the real magic happened in their evening routines. These weren't casual bedtime habits. They were survival rituals passed down through generations. Mothers taught daughters exactly how to prepare the sleeping area. Fluffing straw bedding, checking for dampness, arranging the warmest furs closest to the smallest children. Fathers showed sons how to bank the fire properly, explaining that tomorrow's warmth depended on tonight's technique. Well, here's what's fascinating about medieval people. They never stopped adapting. Each winter taught them something new. A crack that let in cold air got stuffed with fresh material. A drafty corner got blocked with hanging cloth. They treated their homes like living things that needed constant attention and adjustment. Daily chores weren't just busy work either. Keeping floors dry prevented the bone-deep cold that came from ground moisture. Repairing wall cracks stopped those sneaky drafts that could make an entire room unbearable. Even cleaning out old straw and replacing it with fresh material made huge differences in warmth retention. And the weird part is how much they depended on each other. Families shared knowledge like their lives depended on it. Because they did. Grandmothers remembered the harshest winters and shared tricks that younger people hadn't learned yet. Neighbors checked on each other, especially the elderly or families with new babies. Community wasn't just about being nice, it was about survival insurance. The family that helped others repair their roof could count on help when their own walls needed patching. Information flowed freely, too. Who had found the best materials for insulation? Which techniques worked best for their particular area? Makes sense, right? Without modern weather forecasting, heating systems, or emergency services, medieval people created their own safety nets through relationships and shared wisdom. Their adaptation never stopped either. Each generation refined the techniques, improved the methods, and developed better ways to stay warm. They didn't have the luxury of giving up when things got tough. Winter demanded respect, preparation, and community cooperation. And somehow, they made it work year after year.